Thank you, Dean Clemens, for that great introduction. I'd like to thank President Oxby for inviting me to give this talk. It's a sort of going away presence, and it'll be my last public lecture, I'm sure. But before I start, I promised my colleague I would tell this short story, because after all, as historians, we tell stories. I was in the basement of Mason Hall this morning, and I saw students scurrying. Is this Mason Hall? Where's room so and so and so? And I thought to myself, it brought back a memory. 1986, when I arrived here, my youngest son had only been born 2 weeks before time. So I operated the entire year with an average of 3 hours of sleep a night. So the morning of my first convocation, I slept through and woke up at 11:45. I threw on my garb, I ran over, and I walked in with the last few people. So the entire convocation, everybody was staring at me. And I couldn't figure out why. And then afterwards, one of my colleagues came up and said, "Sid, that was fantastic. You went from assistant professor to trustee." Which means someday, some of you, even though the first few days might be a bit confusing, you might be up here giving a convocation speech, or you might be sitting over here as a trustee, and we hope so. Now, I want to first extend my welcome to the class of 2018, a very special class at a very special place, Pomona College. I have a sense of the background of how you arrived here. I know many of you have gone through very anxious moments and sleepless nights to get here. But the next 4 years of Pomona will prepare you for what the world has to offer. However, even in this grand moment of celebration of your achievements, you must also recognize that we are living in one of the most terrifying and frightening moments in the history of the world. We hear about the struggles in the Crimea, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Syria, the Gaza Strip, and many other places. We hear terms like HIV/AIDS, Ebola, the prison industrial complex, prison, and names like Oscar Grant, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Omar Abrego, and Isel Ford. The latter two you may not have heard of, but they were recently killed by the LAPD only blocks from the house where I grew up in, and where my sister now lives in South Central LA. Now, according to some very specious and unreliable statistics issued by the FBI, there have been approximately 400 justified political homicides. 400 justified political homicides per year since 2008. In 1970, I was almost one of those statistics. After being racially profiled, handcuffed, roughed up, and chained to a fence, if not for witnesses, a group of old black men sitting across playing dominoes, one of which said, "That's Miss Lamel's boy. That's a good boy. Leave him alone." Without that witness, I probably wouldn't be standing here in front of you today. My crime, you ask? It's called DWB, driving while black. Returning from a night class at California State University of Los Angeles, 2 blocks from my home. Now, all of these things are connected in one way to another on 3 very important things: economic decline, cultural decay, and political memories. Yes, These are often the results of increased poverty, fear of poverty, and the intentional creation of poverty. Yes, it also includes addictive cultural consumption that tries to convince us we are only vital and vibrant when we are consuming. Bored? Go buy a new smartphone, or download a song from iTunes, or play Candy Crush. Down and out? Go to your Twitter, your Snapchat, or your Instagram app. Still feeling down? Turn on the television and watch what I call unreality shows like Keeping Up with the Kardashians, TMZ, that reinforce mind-deadening passivity. Yes, unfortunately, this is so much what this consumer culture has promoted today. Moreover, on the issue of political malaise, especially given an ineffective President Obama in the White House and a recalcitrant Congress, this can and possibly will give rise to a deep sense of maybe, just perhaps maybe, a private liberal arts institution like Pomona can no longer have the wherewithal to respond to the deep divisions within society and the world. However, I believe we at Pomona College, and that includes all of you in this room, and in particular the class of 2018, can lessen that divide. Now at this point, I probably have succeeded in depressing and or frightening you, but hopefully also got your attention. Let me say, there is a bright side, and it is each one of you in this room, and in particular the class of 2018. Now this is the part of the speech where I, as a very wise old professor, emphasis on old, enrolled in medieval garb that you'll only see twice a year. I'm supposed to give you, as young, impressionable students, some incisive advice to help you get through your years of college. Often this is done through the use of metaphor, by invoking some image that captures the essence of how to get the most out of your college experience. Some obvious metaphors come to mind. For example, we can think of your time in college as something like scaling a mountain. This appropriately implies the need for sustained effort. It suggests that you'll encounter unexpected challenges along the way, and undoubtedly you will. And of course it implies that with determination, skill, and a little luck, you'll eventually triumph and reach the top of the mountain. Another metaphor for college is that it's like a rite of passage. We ask you to accomplish certain tasks. At some point, you might think these are impossible tasks, but we ask them nonetheless. And once you've completed them, you're given a diploma, a sort of badge of stick-to-itiveness, indicating you're a full-fledged member of that august group known as college graduates. These metaphors are okay, but they don't quite work for me. I believe there's a better one. I believe the Akan symbol of Sankofa is more appropriate. Sankofa, the Sankofa symbol, has been adopted as an important symbol of African American and African diaspora in context to represent the need to reflect on the past to build a successful future. In the words of the Akan language of Ghana, it translates in English as go back and get it, or it is not wrong to go back for that which you have forgotten. The Akan used the symbol of a bird with its head turned backwards, with its feet firmly planted in the present and the body facing the future. How about this? Let's think of your Pomona career in terms of a Sankofa symbol. I say to you, the class of 2018, that that you can make a fundamental difference, not alone, but using the past, the image and symbol of Sankofa, to play a crucial role in the future. You can do it in the following way. Know your human history so that you can try to revitalize life in the present and in the future. Now, by life, public life, I mean acknowledging the interdependencies and interrelationships upon one another. I'm talking about that rich notion of citizenship, the idea that ordinary people are capable of ruling, not simply being ruled. It's a precious idea. It's called democracy, real democracy, and real liberty. A quote often incorrectly attributed to Benjamin Franklin reads thus: "Democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch. Liberty is a well-armed lamb contesting the vote." Now, where there is a debate as to whether Franklin ever said these words, to me the point is clear. In order to have true democracy and liberty, you must arm yourself with knowledge and a knowledge of history. Keep in mind how rare democracies and liberty are in human history, and how short-lived they often are, especially when they're undermined. It usually has much to do with levels of poverty that produce despair and desperation, or levels of paranoia that produce levels of distrust and suspicion. There was a recent Time magazine article entitled "The Coming Race War Will Not Be About Race." It was written by the legendary athlete, actor, producer, cultural ambassador for the U.S., philosopher, and historian, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Now, for those of you that only know Kareem because of his skyhook, you should also know he's written at least 8 books and produced 1 film on African-American history. In the article, Kareem reflects on the recent events of Ferguson, Missouri, and popular protests. He wrote the following: "Dystopian books and movies like Snowpiercer, The Giver, Divergent, Hunger Games, and Elysium have been the rage for the last few years. Not just because they express teen frustration at authority figures that would explain some of the popularity amongst younger audiences, but not amongst the 20-somethings and even older adults like myself. The reason we flock to see Donald Sutherland's porcelain portrayal in Hunger Games of a cold and ruthless president of the United States dedicated to preserving the rich while grinding his heels on the necks of the poor is that it brings truth. In a society where 1% is richer or gets richer, and the middle class is collapsing. And I would add, the working class is being ground into the ground, into dust, while carrying the burden of the 1%, who now own more wealth than the bottom 90%. So my advice, my humble advice to the class of 2018 is to expand public and private dialogue about democracy and liberty by first having a deep and abiding sense of history. I say to you, one must have a tragic sense of history, not in the sense of bad or catastrophic, but in the sense of how it affects the lives of people. Many of you know, hopefully, George R.R. Martin, whose novel series, A Song of Ice and Fire, was adapted into the popular HBO series, A Game of Thrones. Have any of you watched The Game of Thrones? That's all? So you're a throne, that's what you're saying. Okay. Martin understands the tragic sense of history, which is why his material feels so authentic and historical. even though it sometimes deals with dragons and white walkers as literary tropes. Many of you may not realize that much of his material is based on history. For example, the controversial Red Wedding episode is based on two events in Scottish history that took place in the 15th and 17th centuries. Much of what Martin and his series co-writers so successfully do is focused on tragedies, where good people often die and bad people often prevail. Martin's ultimate aim is an exploration of the internal conflicts that define the human condition. That's history. That's real. Frederick Hegel said, "History is a slaughterhouse because of the blood, sweat, and tears of people." Although I should also add his 19th century Eurocentric vision of the world led him to postulate Africa had no history. If you take my class last semester, I will explain that. Another historian, Edward Gibbon, in The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire said, "History is a series of human crimes, of follies, of misfortune." And yes, we know history is inextricably intertwined with wounds, heartache, sorrow, and grief. But it's more than that. We ought not to confuse the tragic with the pathetic or the inevitable. Tragic is about the exploration of human possibilities for freedom. That is what Martin's work is about. That's what Shakespeare's King Lear is about. That's what Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude is about. That's what Toni Morrison's Beloved is about. The exploration of human possibilities of freedom, which are often thwarted by power and domination. A sense of history will give you a view of the world in which no culture, no civilization, and no society has a monopoly on wisdom or virtue. It will allow you to see ambiguous legacies in the past, to emphasize hybrid cultures, because every culture that we know is based in part on fragments of antecedent cultures. No pure or pristine traditions here. No either-or perspective here. It's about complexity and it's about subtlety. In addition, going hand in hand with the tragic view of history, or tragic sense of history, is an all-embracing moral vision. Because the tragic sense of history should generate a sense of empathy, sympathy, and above all, knowledge. To try to identify with frustrations and anxieties of others and those who look other, who come from other places, and have other sexual orientations. It is an all-embracing vision, never losing sight of the humanity of others. What brought this to mind as I prepared this talk was a group of meetings last year where students of color expressed anger and consternation at the conditions they faced on campus. As a Posse 7 mentor for 3 years, I have heard many of these same things. The students felt isolated by an overwhelming environment of entitlement and privilege. One thing I learned from these students is that this should not be interpreted as a plea for special treatment, but rather a demand for equal treatment. The Pomona College administration and faculty will hopefully do their part in rectifying this. But the class of 2018 can also play a vital role in changing that situation. Not all at once, but by being thoughtful, proactive fellow students, and above all, decent human beings. Simone Weil, the great French philosopher and political activist, said it well when she said, "Love of thy neighbor and all of its fullness, being able to say to him or her, what are you going through? Can I be of service?" Something I hope all of you adopt as your approach to your fellow students. And yes, it is true that an all-embracing moral vision means that we often have to run counter to our own feelings and ideas. Because we live in a frenzied society where there is a frenzy against the other, most often connected to xenophobic hatred, fear of all Muslims as terrorists, of immigrants, even innocent children, of groups, of parties, of nations that many want to exclude, put up thick walls or electrified fences to segregate them out. This makes it more difficult to build the kind of bridges that we know to be requisite to create a simple, or not simple, a sustainable society, but an enlightened, just, and environmentally verdant society and world. Last but not least, there is a need for daring hope. Yes, I avoided the phrase audacity of hope. I don't mean just optimism. I am by no means an optimist. I am a black man that has lived in America for 68 years. No grounds for optimism here, especially given the progress and the regress, or as V.I. Lenin once said, one step forward and two steps back. In my mind, optimism is the notion that there is sufficient evidence that we know that will allow us to infer that if we keep doing something we're doing, things will get better. This also brings to mind Albert Einstein's definition of insanity. That is, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. I don't believe in that. But I am, and I repeat, I am a prisoner of hope, which is something else. I believe in cutting against the grain, against the so-called evidence, against popular conceptions and misconceptions. William James said it so well in his 1879 essay called The Sentiment of Rationality, where he talks about faith being the courage to act when doubt is warranted. And that's what I'm talking about. Of course, with respect to hope, I come from a tradition, the African American tradition, in which we define faith as stepping out on nothing and hoping to hit something. This is the history of many black and poor people in this country. Hope against hope, and yet still trying to sustain the notion that we and all people of all races, of all religions in this global society can be energized and galvanized around causes and principles and ideas that are bigger than us, that can appeal to the better aspects of our nature, so that we, in fact, can reach the conclusion: the world is incomplete. History is unfinished. The future is open-ended. And what we think and what we do does make a difference. That's the symbol of Sankofa. Be rooted in the present, but know the past in order to make a better future. Now I want to leave you with the immortal words of Tyrion Lannister, the so-called, in an episode that probably many of you saw from Game of Thrones. He said, "Never forget what you are, for surely the world will not. Make it your strength, then it can never be your weakness. Armor yourself in it, and it will never be used to hurt you." Now let me elaborate a little bit on Never forget what you are, for surely the world will not. Meaning, if you respect yourself, and if you carry yourself with pride, and do good things, and be proud to be called by your name and who you are, then everyone else will remember you. Most people are remembered are the ones who do good, like Martin Luther King, Cesar Chavez, Rosa Parks, Frida Kahlo, and Nelson Mandela, among many others. All of whom, by the way, at one time or another were branded communists or terrorists. As James Baldwin said, if you know from whence you came, there is really no limit to where you can go. Next, make it your strength, then it will never be your weakness. Make who you are your strength, have confidence in yourself, don't be afraid to speak your mind against injustice, work on your flaws while sharpening your self-awareness. Lastly, armor yourself in it, and it will never be used against you. Arm yourself with knowledge, and be strong in your convictions, so that the unenlightened and ignorant individuals that you might encounter at some point, not everyone, but that you might encounter, cannot use it against you. Yet, I must caution, don't interpret this as a call to maintain or to reinforce race, gender, or class privilege. Rather, it is a call to become part of a global community that attacks what we social scientists call the interlapping systems of oppression: racism, sexism, classism, and homophobia. Finally, remember, no matter if you decide to major in the sciences, the humanities, or the social sciences, by the way, I disagree with President Oxley. I don't want to get paid for this. I want all 400 of you to take history classes in any areas. Anyhow, this all applies to you. But it's not just about you alone, but the society you want to live in and the society you want to build. As we used to say in the 60s, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of